Welcome back. Today we're going to look at events in more detail. We've seen mouse events, but today we'll look at some other events such as the keyboard events and a special event called the enter frame event. In addition to that, we're going to look at selection. We've seen sequence and we've seen iteration when we were talking about loops. Now we're going to have a look at selection, which is basically, as you'll see, if statements. But there are a few variations on an if statement. So let's begin. So the first thing you'll want to do is create a new flash file. I called mine keyboard movement, and I've drawn a square. I'll just delete that one and recreate it. Also deleting it from my library as well. Okay, so just draw a square this time rather than a circle. So use the rectangle tool and draw the best square that you can. Okay, and select the cursor, right click, and we're going to convert this to a symbol like we've done in the past with our circle. Okay, so for the name, you can give it the name square, and registration point is set to the top left. We'll leave that as the default, and that's all you need to do from there. Next thing we want to do is set the properties of this square. We need to give it an instance name. So the instance name that we're going to give it is just square with a lowercase s. So generally in Flash we want our instance names to have a lowercase s, but our class names and if we have a look at the library, the types of our symbols, we want a capital S. Okay, so just checking that again. So we've got square. Now you can save that. It's always good to save your progress along the way. Now we're going to create a document class for this Flash file. So again, make sure you've clicked off the stage so we know the document is selected, and you're going to enter a class. So I've already put it in there, but it's keyboard with a capital K, and then movement with a capital M. So you can create that. You should know the steps to create a document class now. Okay, so this is the keyboard movement class which you guys will be creating. So the first thing is our import statements. Well, actually we've got that package statement and then our first brace. So everything within this brace is part of the package, and it's the default package. Okay, so import statements. We're importing movie clip. Now that's pretty standard with our document classes now. Now we're importing the event class. So we're going to be working with events, so we'll need to import the event class. And we're importing, rather than mouse event, we're importing keyboard event. Final import statement is this flash.ui.keyboard. The keyboard class will allow us to use special constants to refer to the keys that we pressed on the keyboard. Okay, so we've got the public class keyboard movement, extends movie clip. And then we've got some variables. Now these are Boolean variables. Boolean with a capital B. I can remove those spaces there. I don't typically have spaces there, but you can of course have them if you want to. So we've got upPressed, downPressed, leftPressed, and rightPressed. So we're going to be detecting keyboard movement using the arrow keys. And we've set these all to false. So by default, we're saying that none of these keys are pressed. It's only when they actually are pressed while our program is running that these Boolean variables will be set to true. Okay, we've got our constructor now, which is keyboard movement, same name as our class name, so that's how we know it's a constructor. And we've got some event listeners now. Now here's square. So square is a symbol we created at the start. And we're adding an event listener. The event you haven't seen before is event.enterFrame. The code that's going to run when that event occurs is move in direction of key. So the enter frame event. This is a very important one, and one you'll be using a lot in your own programs. So let's add a comment for that. So enter frame event occurs every frame of your program. When we created our Flash file, by default, it's set you could specify a frames per second, and we specified the default, which was 24. So you probably can't see it on my screen, but the FPS by default is 24 frames per second. So this event, enter frame, is going to run 24 times per second. So every single frame of your program, this event will occur. It will go off. We want to make sure that any code that runs in the enter frame event is efficient, so it doesn't utilize too much memory or CPU. So move in direction of key. We'll have a look at that shortly. But notice that we've added this event listener to just the square. We haven't added it to the stage. We've just added it to the square. Next thing is we're adding an event listener to detect the Keyboard.Event.keyDown. So key down is when you're actually pressing a key down on the keyboard. It's not when you've pressed the key and released it. It's only when you pressed it down. And the code that will run when you press down on a key is setKeyPressed. Likewise, with this next line, we've got KeyboardEvent.keyUp. So this is when you release the key on the keyboard. So you take your finger off it and it rises up. So that's very important. We've got two different functions that run when we're pressing the key down and pressing the key up. So let's have a look at move in direction of key first. Okay, so it's taking an event parameter, and we've got some fairly simple code. When you're moving and you press down on a particular key, we're going to set these flags, upPressed, downPressed, leftPressed, rightPressed. We're going to set those depending on which key you pressed. So we set these in the functions below, which you haven't seen yet. When upPressed occurs, when you press down on the up key, we're going to change the Y position of the square by -5. So this minus sign followed by the equal signs means whatever the value of Y, we're going to decrease it by 5. So it's just a shorthand syntax of saying square.y equals square.y take 5. Okay, so just remember that. It's just a shorthand syntax for this over here. Similarly with the down. So plus equals. So that's just shorthand for square.x equals square.x plus 5. Okay, so when the down key is pressed, we're going to increase the value of y, which is going to move our square down the screen. So remember that 0 is at the top on the y-axis, 0 is at the top of the screen. When you increase y value, you go down the screen. Similarly with the left and the right. So going to the left, the 0 point on the x-axis is on the left. And so when you're decreasing by 5, you're moving towards that 0 axis on the left. And then you're moving to the right as well. Okay, so this function is fairly simple. And we're using for the first time if statements. These if statements are fairly simple. You're just saying if and in brackets, you're testing to see whether what's in the brackets is true or false. If it's true, so if upPressed equals true, then the code inside the if statement will run. So this upPressed, we declared that as a Boolean. So Boolean values have true or false values, as you remember. Okay, let's have a look at setKeyPressed. So setKeyPressed occurs when we press a key down. We've got a lot of if statements again. We've got if event.keyCode is equal to Keyboard.UP. So before we go further, let's talk about this here, this double equal sign. So the double equal sign means is equal to. In some languages, you can have a single equal sign, but it's best practice to use a double equal sign. So you're saying if event code is equal to Keyboard.UP, then we're going to do something. So if this is true. If it's not true, then we skip this line here. It doesn't run at all. It's only if this is true that we'll set upPressed to true. Similarly with event.keyCode.Keyboard.DOWN, we're setting downPressed. Actually, we don't need these break here. Let's get rid of those. We've got if statements for the other keys as well. And let's just run it. We still have to look at unsetKeyPressed, but let's just run our code and see how it works. Okay, so we've got our square, and I'll just move the mouse cursor out of the way, and I'll use the arrow keys to move the square around. So I'm clicking the right key, left, up, and down. Okay, so it's working as expected. However, there is a simpler syntax for writing all these if statements, and it's called the switch statement. So I'm going to comment this one out. So just quickly have a read of this again, because we're going to comment it out and look at a simpler syntax rather than having all these if statements. So I'm doing a multi-line comment to comment out the entire function. Okay, let's have a look at a different setKeyPressed function which uses the switch statement. And just remove that one as well. It's very similar to our first setKeyPressed function, but it's using a switch statement instead. Switch indicates whatever's in the brackets, indicates what we're interested in, what value we're interested in, and that is event.keyCode. So all these case statements, they are going to see whether what's to the right of the case statement, whether that is the same as what's in the switch statement. So it's an equality operator. It's effectively saying if event.keyCode is equal to Keyboard.UP, then we're going to do whatever in these braces. So similarly with Keyboard.DOWN, Keyboard.LEFT, and Keyboard.RIGHT. Now you will notice up here we don't have the break keyword. We do have the break keyword here in the switch statement. Break means we're going to exit our switch statement. So this line runs, we break, and then we exit the entire switch statement, which is down here, and it just so happens to be the end of our function. So we effectively leave the function after that. So break means exit a switch statement. And there are reasons why we have this break statement. You wouldn't necessarily need it in this case, because the event.keyCode would be one or other of these options. So keyboard down or up. So you wouldn't be up or down at the same time. But there are reasons why we have this break statement. And it's always good practice to have that in there. Okay, so let's save this with the switch statement and run it again. Okay, so it should run exactly the same. Yep, so I'm moving the arrow keys and it's moving around. Okay, final thing we need to look at is the unsetKeyPressed. Now I've used a switch statement again. In our setKeyPressed, we set depending on what key is pressed, we set upPressed to true or downPressed to true. Okay, and when upPressed is set to true, this other function will be running, move in direction of key, because this, remember, this move in direction of key runs 24 times per second by default, and it'll run more often if you increase the frames per second. So this is running nearly all the time. So it's going to say if upPressed is equal to true, then we're going to move the square up by 5 pixels, and so we're decreasing the y-axis. Okay, so hopefully you can see the link. Have a good look at the code, but you can see that we're setting upPressed when the key is pressed down. This function detects that we've pressed the up key and moves the square up 5 pixels. Now the unsetKeyPressed is called when we lift our key off the keyboard. So when we lift our key up of the up arrow, we set upPressed to false. So when this function runs again, it will see that upPressed is not true. So this is the same as upPressed equal to true, but we don't need to do that because it's a Boolean variable. So we can delete that. So when this function runs again, it will see that upPressed is not true. So it's just going to skip this. This will not run because upPressed is set to false. Okay? And there's the rest of the function as well. So run this code and see if you can put the 3 functions together in your mind. So see if you can understand that this event listener will run every frame and call this code. This function runs when you press the key down. This function runs when you lift your key off the keyboard. So just run it. Experiment with changing some of the pixel values perhaps, and just get familiar with this code so that you understand how it works.